on Yom Kippur, there is a reading from Scripture from the prophet Isaiah, where Isaiah critiques fasting if you don't also engage in social justice, and says that the chosen fast, the fast that really matters, is a fast that involves people leaving the experience and saying, we're now going to connect, we're going to do work in the community, we're going to make sure that people are not hungry, are not without clothing, are not without shelter. We also decided to keep it going in the fall and create a second cohort of people doing the food stamp challenge and sharing the experience together in advance of Thanksgiving, which was another natural opportunity when we're about to celebrate abundance, when we're going to gather in cohorts to have wonderful meals together, to remember that there are people for whom this is not available and that food abundance is something that is true for a slice of America and not for everyone. For the people doing this, it's not a hardship, it's not a crisis, it's something we're doing to deepen our understanding about America, and for people to realize that food insecurity is very real, that hunger also is real, but food insecurity, not knowing where your next meal is going to come from. We're approaching Thanksgiving at the transition after an election campaign where there was a lot of discussion about the safety net, about what would happen. And the discussion got so skewed because so much of the conversation was about the middle class and not the working poor. And so much of the conversation about the working poor was skewed into a conversation about what do people deserve? Do people think about entitlements as something that, wow, great, I can live on entitlements? It's a miserable life, and we do need jobs, and we do need a way to help people, but we also need childcare, and we need a way for people to be able to take advantage of the jobs that are there. And that's all what's being taught through this, to let people know this is real, this is not a game, this is not something that anybody chooses, but it is something that defines how people make their, food choices. When you think about the Sabbath and Sabbath observance, and the idea of having wine and having, challah bread, which, is going to cost way more than a normal loaf of bread, and having a meat meal, and kosher meat is, somewhat more expensive, and kosher food can be somewhat more expensive. When you think about trying to live on this and have a Sabbath meal, and have some of the things that we totally take for granted, and having to decide to choose between, or how can we make a Sabbath meal special in the context of this kind of limited budget, it really brings back the idea that you might have to save bits of money week by week or from other parts of the week meals in order to have something special for the Sabbath. And these are all things that you need to think about. A number of my colleagues made a community Sabbath meal using this kind of meal planning a sort of culminating moment for the food stamp challenge. And here in our community, we're going to have a little meal together at the end of our day today after doing the shopping, just so that we sit down together and say, okay, this is what a meal might look like for a family to sit down together, and this is what they'd be eating. The core text of the Passover family Seder is to remind us of the importance ethically of making sure that you're not part of systems that oppress people or marginalize people or impoverish people. And it's not just a question about being self-protective so you're not going to be a slave again. That was not what was being taught. What is repeated in the name of Moses is, you know the heart of the stranger, and therefore there is this obligation to love and protect the stranger. So I want to really reiterate that, because one of the battles that always goes on in religious communities is that between in-reach and outreach, is that between self-preservation and self-care and taking care of people who might be seen as way outside of your community and of your circle of caring. And to say, no, actually, our system's crystal clear about that there is nobody who's outside of our circle of caring. There's nobody to whom we are not related. There's no one to whom we are not linked. And that is the message. And that if we have a core mythic narrative, it is the story of exile and redemption, of having been enslaved and going through life from that point forward, saying, we have to look and say, who's in that situation today and what can we do about it? And that's, a sensitivity that every generation needs to have reinforced. I suppose that's why the Passover Seder is redone every year, to say this is not history, this is your story. There are ways in which you are part of that story of enslavement and loss, and that has to motivate you. I think the classic texts in the tradition about the hungry are the texts that come out of the prophetic tradition. And the tradition of the prophets was a tradition that said, whatever you are doing is not really working as long as there are people who are hungry, who are without clothing, who are without shelter. That's how you judge a society. That sense that we have, and it's become something of a catchphrase in modern American social discourse, that we are only as safe and as well taken care of as the least amongst us, is really something, again, deeply embedded in that prophetic tradition that runs throughout Judaism, runs throughout Christianity, of saying that's how you have to evaluate yourself. So when they are hungry, when there are hungry, we are not at rest. We have to be working. And to really understand that, not to have that narrow a view of what hunger is, that when we talk about food insecurity, when we talk about the fact that there are people who are not sure where their next meal comes from, that's where our vision needs to be. So when we read in Amos and when we read in Isaiah and in these great voices of people turning to the leaders of society and saying, you guys are very smug, you guys think you have it all worked out, you believe that your affluence is a sign of divine favor, we are here to tell you that your affluence is a gift. And it is something that is supported, maintained, and preserved to the extent that you use some of what you have as a gift, and that you support those who need help. And that is, in fact, how one responds to plenty.